go back to the balloon, does the Pentagon know with certainty now that the balloon actually came from China? It was launched from China, and if so, where? And then the DoD has said that there have been at least 3 other balloon incidents during the previous administration and 1 other incident during this administration. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to discern that these balloons were the same and they were also Chinese spy balloons?
Sure. Let me address your second questions. Well, your second question first. I'm not able to go into the intelligence. As you highlight, we are aware that there have been 4 previous balloons that have gone over U.S. territory. This is what we assess as part of a larger Chinese surveillance balloon program. You've heard us talk in the past about the fact that this is a program that's been operated for several years. What we do know is that in some cases, whereas some of these balloons previously had not been identified, subsequent intelligence analysis did enable us to indicate that these were Chinese balloons. In terms of where they're coming from, I can't go into the specific location other than to say China. The last thing I'll say is that this last week provided the United States with a unique opportunity to learn a lot more about the Chinese surveillance balloon program, all information that will help us to continue to strengthen our ability to track these kinds of objects.
Thank you. As you said, as it's part of a wider surveillance program, if 4 previous ones had transited the U.S., have there been others that maybe got near international U.S. military installations but didn't actually cross U.S. soil?
Yeah, again, for classification reasons, I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of details other than these 4 are the ones that we assess went over U.S. soil. And I'm not going to go over specifically what they tracked other than what we've acknowledged publicly, that we know that they were looking to surveil strategic sites, to include some of our strategic bases in the continental United States. And so when you look at the scope of this program, and the fact that we know that these balloons have been spotted in what we now can subsequently assess to be Chinese balloons operating over at least 5 continents in regions like Latin America, South America, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Europe. Again, it demonstrates why, for the Department of Defense, that China remains the pacing challenge and something that we'll continue to stay focused on. Thank you. Jennifer.
Thanks, Pat. Do these Chinese surveillance balloons somehow explain the UAP, some of the unidentified aerial phenomena that were reported in that report to Congress? Have you gone back to look, and are some of those UAP incidents perhaps those Chinese surveillance balloons? And also, did you start tracking this balloon when it left China on July 21st? Were you tracking it all the way over the Pacific Ocean, or did you just start tracking it when it got close to Alaska?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So your first question, that's really a question best addressed by the Director of National Intelligence that puts that report together. I will say, broadly speaking, that when it comes to our assessment of objects in air and space, that's going to always be ongoing work, right? So anytime there's something that's unidentified, by default, we will track that information, and when new information can become available that we can apply, certainly we're going to do that. But to answer your direct question, the DNI would be the best folks to address that portion. In terms of when we started tracking this, again, I'm not going to get into those kinds of specifics other than to say we did see it approaching U.S. airspace. NORAD, NORTHCOM tracked it for the duration. Again, as it entered U.S. airspace, NORAD determined that it did not pose a physical or military threat, and in accordance with their procedures, monitored it. When it did come over the continental United States, we began to develop options on how to take it down and address this threat, with the idea being that we wanted to wait until it was over water so that we could mitigate any potential civilian harm or property damage. And importantly, as I highlighted, use this as an opportunity to, again, better understand the Chinese surveillance balloon program and apply that information to increase our ability to track these kinds of objects. Thanks.
Can you clarify when the Chinese balloon, the last surveillance balloon that went down near Hawaii, went down? There are reports that it was 4 months ago, and there's another report that it was in June. When did it go down?
Yeah, I've seen those press reports. Again, I'm not going to have any information to provide on the previous balloon flights that were out there, but again, appreciate your understanding on that. Dan.
Thank you. Could you just, in layman's terms, explain why there has been this, what the general called awareness gaps, why the U.S. was not able to detect these kinds of balloons previously? And then, given that, is there a kind of intelligence failure here? Did the military and the intelligence somehow fail to understand or grasp this threat, or is it a failure of imagination? And how is that being addressed?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So to answer your last question there right up front, no, it was not an intelligence failure. As we learn more about this type of capability, and really what General Van Herk was referring to was previously having a domain awareness gap, but we've learned a lot about these balloons, and we've learned a lot how to track them, as evidenced by the fact that, again, we were tracking it as it approached U.S. airspace. And so we're confident that what we've learned about this program enables us to be able to monitor and be on the lookout for these kinds of capabilities. When you think about the wide array of activities that we monitor globally, but most importantly when it comes to defense of the homeland along our coasts and our skies, by being able to identify the characteristics of things like this or other potential threats, it all gets put into a broader library, so to speak, of information that our analysts can monitor, track, and detect, and then respond appropriately.
And then in terms of this global program, are the balloons that are spotted elsewhere in the world essentially similar to the one that was flying across the U.S.? And is there reason to believe that those balloons were flying near or over U.S. military bases abroad in those countries?
Yeah, so beyond the fact that they share the common characteristic of being surveillance balloons, right? Intelligence collection assets that the PRC is employing. The only other thing I'd say is that we do know there's variation in the various sizes and capabilities of the balloon. But beyond that, I'm not going to go into specifics. In other words, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. In terms of what they're monitoring and what their flight paths are going to be, I'm not going to go into that level of information. But needless to say, again, it calls into question why China, the PRC, feel that it's okay to violate sovereign airspace of nations in a way that is inappropriate and unacceptable. So combining this capability with the other intelligence assets that they have at their disposal. So again, as I highlighted earlier, this just demonstrates why the PRC continues to remain our pacing challenge. And I think that they have a lot of explaining to do when it comes to conducting these types of programs and violating nations' airspace and sovereignty. Thank you. Ma'am.
Thank you so much, General. Two separate lines of questioning on the balloon for you. First, did you guys assess that this was a fleet after this balloon was spotted, or from what you've determined in previous UAP investigations? And with that, are you planning to declassify any information about those 163 reports of balloon and balloon-like entities so that we could understand better how they compare and don't compare?
Yeah, so on your second question, I'd refer you to the DNI. Clearly, within the realms of operations security and protecting intelligence sources and methods, we are trying our best to provide the public with as much information as we can on this program, recognizing that we don't want to do anything that's going to compromise our sources and methods. In terms of your question about assessments on the overall surveillance balloon fleet, yes, we were tracking this before this particular incident. As I mentioned, our awareness and understanding of this capability has increased over the last couple of years. As General Van Herk highlighted, this wasn't information that we necessarily had previously, but again, our analysts have been able to, over time, put the pieces together and learn a lot more about this program. And they'll